Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Since I'm currently visiting Iceland, which is one of the premier locations for yarn when you're like a knitter or a crocheter or otherwise fiber user, I thought that I would document the yarn that I got while I was in Iceland. There's only plans to go to one store in Iceland for yarn, even if I don't find any other yarn while I'm here. That in itself was enough to like separate from my normal video content and go more to like the content I use for the yarn crawls to show off what I got. So this is the storefront of the place that I went to. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, which is why I just showed it to you. I did gain a lot of yarn here, more than I was expecting to get. I had plans to buy yarn here anyway because part of the reason for the trip is to make a Lola Pesa sweater. If I'm wrong, I'm going to correct it here. The type of yarn that is needed for the sweater is actually cheaper to get in Iceland than it is in the States. I was going to stash bust for this particular project, except I don't have too much Icelandic yarn in my stash right now. It may seem like I have everything already, but I don't. I got it here. When we went in to the store, it was more than a yarn store. They also had knitting notions. There's a whole area just of buttons. Also had a lot of handmade sweaters of the intricate colorwork designs that were around. Very similar to how a woolen store operates in Ireland was what the store was like in Iceland. And there were multiple rooms, so pretty much everything in the front room came from people who were local in the area, with the exception of the yarn that we had to buy for the sweater. Everything was made by people who are local to the area or work at the store. So this was the yarn that we got for the sweater. I got 5 balls of this and 1 ball of that. It's gonna be my nice little contrast pattern. And it is a bit of a rougher yarn. I don't know how much I'm going to like it against my skin, but it's a sweater. You can always just layer with the sweater. So far as I've been using it, it's been nice to work with something that's nice and bulky. And it does have a bit of a rougher texture feel, but the colors are amazing. It's the Alafas Lopi, ideal for outdoor wear. This is just 100% wool. You can tell we're in Iceland because we have more of the Icelandic writing, which compared to other languages that I can kind of decipher, I haven't actually studied any Nordic languages, so I'm not entirely sure how to interpret Icelandic without knowing it. I saw like an area of these yarns. You can see there is a sheep on the skein, which was my first indication that this was a super local yarn. It was so super local they could actually determine the sheep that this yarn came from. Which I've been finding out throughout this past year that if you keep track of where the fleeces are once you shear them, you can actually keep track of which wool comes from which sheep, which is like yarn is just like a never-ending onion of information to learn. But this says local yarn with traceability from Scarpa is, and as Icelandic is like Gafreld fra Grisoli. So she was born in Griswold in the spring of 2019. She is a mix of regular sheep and a coated sheep, and that makes her have more wool than other sheep. The color of the yarn comes from because she is gray and white mixed under her wool, as shown to the left of this label. Ah, okay, yeah. So that's her undercoat right there, the white, and then her top coat is the gray. Indeed, this nice, lovely little gray color, which I know from experience I'm more likely to use that for something. And then they had a whole wall of hand spun. If I wanted to, I could have used the hand spun for the pattern, because I did ask the designer of the pattern, like, which yarn was best for her pattern, and she did offer the hand spun as an alternative, and they had so much hand spun. It was literally an entire wall from floor to ceiling and like over 8 feet wide, just filled with hand spun yarn. However, most of their hand spun yarn was natural colors, which I didn't necessarily want to use for this sweater. I like a good color. But I couldn't leave without going without some of their hand spun. So this is, I almost went on instinct with this one. I look at like the golden tones mixed with the white. Looks like it is 73 meters and 66 grams, if I understand that correctly. Lamb sole, 40/40 Mosi Jutal. I do not understand what any of that means, but that's what I'm seeing on the label. I can tell that's the care instructions right there. Oh, that's like the knitting that you use. This is a 2-ply yarn. Both halves were spun individually with both colors, and then those two strands were strung together. And anyway, that's going to make something super exciting. I don't know what yet. They also had a whole area with thinner yarns that were plant dyed, which led to the most wonderful colors. And I happened to find a yarn that was the perfect purple. Something you might not realize about coming to Iceland is that there are a bunch of lupins everywhere. Until I was told they were lupins, I thought they might have been lilacs or lavender. They're a very similar shape to a bluebell, but bigger. It like decorates the countryside in the most wonderful purple. So I wanted to be able to remember that with the yarn. And they had a purple that dyed in that color. They used indigo to make this. Not surprising. Blue leads to purple. The 175 meters and 50 grams. Lambswool might be the word for wool. I think I'm starting to understand this now. So, lambswool right here is the wool. And then I think that is the dyeing, because that is who spun it. And those are the name of the people who did it. And then the last two things that they got me were not yarn. They also had roving. I wasn't expecting to be able to leave with roving, or I was hoping that I could leave with roving, but I didn't necessarily leave my sights on it like I did with the yarn. Like, I knew with certainty I was going to leave with yarn, but I didn't know if I was going to leave with roving. But they sold roving here, and this is how they package it. This is such a smart idea. This is using the newspaper. They took a lot of effort here. You can actually see they sewed the newspaper shut. They didn't use a glue, they sewed it shut. This is the inside of the roving. I don't know how much is in here. And look at that. It's a bit softer than the yarn because it hasn't been spun yet, but it could create a yarn that's like similar to the yarn that I bought. If you can tell, there's like a mix of the yarn there. It's like, you can tell there's some black hairs and some white hairs, and it's not just like a straight up gray. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there was like some gray hairs in it too. Ooh, I just noticed there's like the one hair that's a different color, like right around here. It just like stood out to my eye. I don't know if the camera is going to be able to catch it in this lighting. Yeah, that was super soft. And I'm going to be excited to try spinning with that. And the last thing I got, pure impulse buy, it's more of the souvenir thing than anything knitting related. But they were selling sheep horn. Not sure how they got this, but I'm guessing the sheep sheds the horns from year to year. So, because I feel like in these times, if they were able to do it without harming the sheep, they wouldn't be doing it. But I found this one. They had a whole bin full of just sheep horns, and then my hand reached this one first, and I was like, yeah, that's the one. You can kind of see there's like a black line through it. Someone else bought a sheep horn, and she said that she could see the keratin on her sheep horn. Like, hers was completely black, and it wasn't just straight up black. So I'm wondering if that's the same thing that's going on with my sheep horn too, where you can see some of the keratin or some of the change in the material. But this is such a smooth thing. It's completely hollow, although it's a little bit pressed in this thing, and it is so smooth. And it's from an Icelandic sheep. Yeah, so that is what I have for this particular shopping trip. I could tell there were like 2 employees there at the time, and both of them were very helpful. Unlike most stores where I go by myself and then I'm usually the only person there, I was actually in there with a group. So we kind of all took over the store. They were very helpful with all of us. But they ended up telling me about the Icelandic refund, where I can actually get some of the money back from this merchant, where it's like, hey, you're a tourist, you don't have to pay money. It's just pretty smart. Like, Ireland had something similar. I didn't have enough time to figure it out with the Ireland one, but I might have enough time to figure out with the Iceland one, because I know I got my flight later on in the day. It wasn't like super close to when we were going to be transported. So we'll have to see about that. That's what I got from this store. So I don't know if I'm going to find anything else this trip. We'll have to wait and see. I got more Icelandic yarn. We ended up going on the sightseeing part of the trip today, and we stopped by a lot of yarn stores. It's like we had a little mini yarn crawl. I got enough yarn that I'm now actually feeling like I'm probably going to end up playing Tetris in order to get all my yarn home, depending on how much I get done.
Solid. Yeah. Thank you.
We need to do a dining party.
I love that deep blue.
The first store that we went to is actually a combination yarn store and dyeing studio. The person who owns the store actually lives there and has her dye studio attached, and you can actually see her start the process of the yarn. She actually used to work at a university, I think it was, and she ended up quitting her job in order to deal with this full time. And in a case of terrible timing, she did this in 2019. She used to be north, but she came south in order to chase the tourists. But tourists weren't coming in 2020 because COVID. She had a rough 2 years, and then once the tourism picked up again, she was able to get more business. But she also, in addition to dyeing the yarn, teaches other people how to dye the yarn. I was relatively restrained. She was talking about all different sorts of yarn. This is yarn, and it's a pretty thin yarn. Like, all the yarns I got ended up being very similar weights. They're not different. The way in which they are different is how they were dyed. So this has cochineal. So this was dyed with a little red bug and indigo. But this skein was all by itself, and it just screamed at me. And then I held it for a while, and I thought it wasn't screaming at me, so I tried to put it back, and then it was like, no, it screamed at me again. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're meant to come home with me. These next two yarns were dyed with lupins. Ever since I'm seeing these lupins, I kind of want to make something with Icelandic yarn that's related to lupins. And so I was just going by colors, but when I found out that they're actually dyeing with lupins, I wanted to get yarn that was dyed with lupins. So these two yarns are both dyed with lupins. The lupin leads to a yellow. Someone had bought out all her yellow lupin the other day, so I ended up buying some greens, which honestly will probably look like the lupin stems in their own right. That's all the yarn I got from that store. I was restrained, yeah, but I did get 2 books. So this is books Plants of Iceland. So there's plastic on it, so it's a bit hard to see, but Gudrun is the name of the lady who runs the store, and she wrote her master's thesis on like plant dyes. So a lot of the information that she has from her master's thesis is in here, but also she includes the fun stories that she was not able to include with her master's thesis that the public would enjoy, like the folklore. So I thought this would just be a good book to read, so I can like learn more about it. People can tell me stuff all they want, but I do enjoy having books. She also wrote this book about plant dyeing in Iceland, so it can give me a little bit more information about the different plants that are around in Iceland, and I got the English copy. Well, she had an Icelandic copy of this one. I don't know if she had an Icelandic copy of this. She probably does. But that's all I got from that store. I can tell you the vibes of the store were immaculate. Multiple people in our tour group said that they wish they could quit their job and just go live with her in her studio, because she is such a friendly person and very knowledgeable about what she does. The next yarn store we went to was like a yarn store that had yarn from people who were in the area. They dyed the yarn. The sheep were local. There were a couple different brands, and so I tried to get a nice sampling of the different yarns that were available. There was also a lot of roving. They ended up weighing the roving for me, but wait till you see this stuff, yeah? Look at those curls. This stuff is super soft, so there's white. This is the white stuff, but I also got white, gray, and black all mixed together. This by itself is going to create a lovely yarn. And even if I didn't spin it all, I mean that's useful for felting, although I have not gotten into felting as much as I've gotten into spinning, and this will probably require some card. And it's so soft. There was also like more roving that seemed more carded already. Like the roving I just showed you isn't carded, it's also sheared and like washed, but this stuff was carded, so it means I can spin it right away. So there's this light gray. I mean, isn't that absolutely divine? And then I got this darker gray in order to contrast with it. this is the type of thing I could like ply together and have like a nice like two-tone gray yarn. Pretty excited about that. Then this here is just like plain white roving, although it's in a bat format. I'm not as familiar with the bat format, but I think that is the store name of the place I was at. They had some yarns that were probably machine spun and dyed, but these are some hand spun. These are like some impressive hand spun, and they have the employee's name. So both of these are compliments of Lena Erickson. I couldn't leave without both of them. I tried to narrow it down to one and was like, no. This I think is just 100% wool. Lamb sole, gorgeous colors. Then they had this love story yarn. It's a super thin yarn. This is even thinner than fingering. This is like lace weight. It's 100% new wool and Icelandic lamb's wool grown in Iceland, spun in Italy with love. Yeah, this was probably the most commercially looking yarn in the store that we saw. And I'm going off of that just by the labels. And then they had a lot of the Storu brand. So the lady who dyes this, she actually works in the store during the winter. This is Lupin. This is the color that Lupin gives. So once I realized there was just like a pure Lupin yellow, I had to get it for whatever it is my Lupin project is going to be. This is just pure Icelandic wool. I'm finding that Iceland doesn't really have any yarn that is not wool, which is okay. Iceland is best when it is being Iceland, yeah. It is nice that there's different yarn traditions all over the world, so that way you can visit them and actually like compare and contrast about what it's like. This is another hand spun. I think I see someone's name on it, but this person wrote in cursive, so I can't really read what that says. It's like also pencil on brown paper, that's kind of hard to see. But I know it's 100 grams and about 103 meters. No, this is 45 grams. Small amount, but this was just a fun yarn. A very fun yarn. This here is like Horpu Gold. This is hand dyed. It's a 1-ply unspun wool. Yeah, unspun wool. Yeah, so they just got the sliber and turned it, but I mean, this is such a vibrant green. It's like a very leafy green. It was near this yarn. So this is Horpu Gold. Oh, I thought these were two different brands when I got them. I was confused. This is a little bit more, but I mean, look at this blue. Like someone else in the store, like she was pointing to a green when she said this, but when she saw it, she's like, these are like Crayola colors. One of the other ladies was impressed at how vibrantly neon pink that this brand was able to get, and she actually bought it. And this is a different brand. Don't know how to pronounce that. It's another, looks like it says DK or DH. I mean, it looks like an H, but knitting wise, I know it's probably a DK, maybe? Unless it's DH in Icelandic. This was just like another very similar yarn in that regard. And then this roving, it's red. Look at that. Not much here, except this is 65 grams and it was made by Ada, or provided by Ada. I asked if Kemba meant anything, and Kemba is just the Icelandic word for roving. Then I got 2 books here. They had this book about Icelandic sheep, all colorful. I think there's apparently 8 pages all about wool. It says the amazing facts about the Icelandic sheep breed, a book for sheep lovers and fans of Iceland. I do have another sheep book at home. I have multiple wool sheep fibery books at home, but it's like, why not read about more Icelandic Pacific one? And I also found a book about Icelandic runes. I do have a set of runes at home. I haven't really used them too much yet, but I figured it'd be interesting to learn more about it. That's what I got from that store. It was a very nice store. I was happy to find all the roving. This store is also selling spinning wheels. It is very, very rare, even if a store is like spinning related in the States, to find a store that has spinning wheels in stock. And the spinning wheel that was available actually was like a new version of the spinning wheel that I got secondhand. It was a Louette single treadle spinning wheel. The next place where I got yarn is actually a wool mill. So it's like a wool mill yarn shop. They're a farm that has sheep and goats on it, and they process the wool in order to turn it into yarn. And then they also process the wool for other people who have wool but not the resources to process it. It's mostly wool, although they do experiment with other fibers as well, like silk, rose, milk. Yeah, milk. If there was a milk yarn there, I would have bought it, but they did not have a milk yarn for sale. Seaweed. We got the whole tour of how the place works, but afterwards we got sent up to the shop and I got a nice little variety of stuff. They had roving. I got like 150 grams of this brownish color, and you can see it's actually like a different shade of brown. Like there's some gray in there. They're like two different colors, so it'd be interesting to open this up and see how it changes. But I also know there was no opening it up in the store, and probably no opening it up until I get back home. This right here is a super soft yarn. This is 100% Icelandic wool. Icelandic virgin wool. So this was from a young sheep, super young. It is a very thin yarn. It's like a nice gray, and this is super soft. The lady who runs the store, like at the mill, has a story of a 14-year-old girl who came to her mill and she just took one of the skeins and started petting the yarn. She just walked around just continually petting the yarn, and she's like, I'm going to buy this. And her mom's like, why are you going to buy this? You're not going to use it. And she's like, I'm going to pet it. The 14-year-old girl had her own way. She used her own money and bought the yarn that she could pet. And one of the other people in the group, when she came across this yarn and she started petting it, she was like, I now feel like that 14-year-old girl. These two are basically Huda. This is the name of her personal store brand. So Hudu is the Icelandic word for hidden. It's also her name. And the way she put it was, like, when she was thinking about what to name her company, someone told her, you should name it after yourself. And she said, well, I thought it was selfish, but I did it anyway. I got these two greens that are slightly off from each other, but I think they go together really well. It's a 2-ply, but it's kind of like a DK fingering weight yarn. Then this here says the Virga brand, I think it was. This means dwarf. And this is a thicker yarn. This is like closer to worsted. And it's like a nice gray. It was a nice natural color. I wanted to get some natural colors from this particular store because we know that she likes mixing the natural colors together to see what type of colors they create. Which she recommends that you buy as many skeins as you need at once, so that way you always have enough for the sweaters. The stock in her store, like the colors are not constant. That story I told you about the sheep yarn, it was actually with this yarn. This is 80% Icelandic cashmere goat and 20% wool. This was the super soft yarn. Although this yarn is still pretty soft. This is the yarn that has the super soft stuff. The other person on the tour was petting. Cashmere is super soft, and you often get like little bits of it at a time, and I think it is the most expensive yarn in the store that is not a kit. And then this here is the disc yarn. This is like the super fine fingering weight. This, according to her, is black. To me, it looks like a dark brown. But she said there's lots of black sheep that have like different varieties. And I mean, maybe it is a black sheep. Like you look at the sheep and you would think like, oh yeah, that's black. But it's interesting to think of how human eyes interpret colors in different ways. And like how like our different experiences and colors, how we interpret the world. So I think it's kind of cool that even though I think it's dark brown, like other people would see this as black. And well, dark brown, black, regardless, I can always use more of that to do like fine details with things. The last thing I got here is a t-shirt. So funny thing, I'm actually in the process of downgrading my t-shirts because there are some t-shirts that are related to workplaces in the past. Sometimes if I'm working in a place and they give me a work-related t-shirt and then I leave the place, I feel odd wearing the t-shirt afterwards because I'm trying to move on to the next stage of my life. So I'm trying to remove t-shirts like that, but I also want more t-shirts that are not necessarily related to that. And well, look at that. So what I was told is that every other word on here is Icelandic. So like the top one, that's the Icelandic word for sheep.
and then it kind of goes like every other one is an Icelandic word relating to a type of sheep. And then every other word here is sheep in a different language. So it's like English, I think that's German, the Schaft, Croatian was mentioned. That's Spanish there, that's French. There was another language mentioned, but I mean, also combined with that picture, like, what a glorious t-shirt. And it wasn't until just now I realized there's a logo on the back. She was actually wearing that shirt today while she was talking to us. The last place I bought yarn today, it's not a yarn shop, it was a cafe. It was inside a hotel, I think it was. There were multiple things going on. I have been told that in Iceland you can buy yarn where you buy food. Like, there's usually a little small yarn display, and I mean, I saw the yarn, I couldn't pass it up. I got really drawn by this kit. I mean, look at that orange. That orange is impressive. It says that there is a pattern for mittens in here. They show a hat and mittens here, but they've only checked off the mittens. And there's a QR code, but there's also paper in there, so I'm hoping that's the pattern, and I'm hoping it's in English, but if not, I've got an Icelandic pattern, and it looks like a sort of Lopi design. I think I may have needles that could work for this. I do think it was more expensive than I was expecting it to be, but that's okay. And then they also had this other brand, the Gilhagi wool mill yarn. This is just a gray 2-ply. It's super soft, and it's pure Icelandic virgin wool from the Arctic North. The sticker is covering stuff. Spun at the family farm Gilhagi. That's good that they're able to spread it around like that. So that's what I got. And I know I probably said this before, but I think unless I end up buying more yarn from that store at the beginning of the trip, I'm probably not going to end up having more yarn this trip. It was nice to hit all those yarn stores today and actually have like a little Icelandic haul. What's also been strange about like the Icelandic yarn is, well, one, some of it is softer than I was expecting it to be, but also two, I'm not going as much on texture for these yarns, because even though there are like softer yarns, like the majority of it is like a rougher wool, and like if you want to appreciate the wool from the sheep, you have to like actually interact with like the wool that's there. This is not all merino wool. This is a breed all of its own. And it has a different feel to it, and it's interesting to feel what that feels like. That was today's entertainment. Have a nice day.